Hello, everybody. Let's get started. This is Hannah Park of SpyPalm Partners. I'm standing in for Matt Hardy for this part of our webinar introduction. So on Matt's behalf and on behalf of the sponsors of today's webinar, Federal Highways and AASHTO, welcome to webinar 29 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series. The topic of today's webinar is Asset Management Process Improvements. This is the fourth installment in a four-part TAM webinar mini-series, Elements of a Transportation Asset Management Plan, focused on understanding federal requirements that guide TAMP development. Also, I wanted to note that our presenters today were part of a small TAM peer exchange that was held in Santa Fe last month that Tammy Haas hosted in Santa Fe. So you'll be getting some of what was shared from that event. You'll get a glimpse before the summary report for that event is available for everyone. Our previous webinar addressed TAM financial plans, and I recommend that you look it up on the AASHTO TAM portal, where you'll also find archives of previous webinars, and links to videos and slides from today's webinar will be posted on the site. Just visit tam-portal.com, that's TAM-portal.com. From there, click TAM Events in the main menu to find recordings of past webinars or to register for any scheduled webinar. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature in the control panel. We will answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Throughout today's webinar, the audience will be muted by default and only the presenters will be audible. Presenters should be sure to use their phone's mute buttons to unmute their phones in order to be heard. That covers the logistics for today's webinar, so I'll turn it over to Steve Gay of Federal Highways.
Thank you so much, Jana. Federal Highway Administration, in cooperation with AASHTO, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. We feel it's a great way to help share practical, useful, timely information with the asset management community, especially realizing we're about 4 months away from the initial TAMPs being due on April 30th. We have 3 excellent presentations on the agenda today, so I'm just going to say a few words of introduction and provide some context for today's presentation. We have covered many topics over the course of these webinars. With today's topic, Transportation Asset Management Process Improvements, we are taking a closer look at an area that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of the TAMP rule, despite its importance in the TAMP development process. States are required to prepare asset management plans for the NHS pavements and bridges. And per 23 CFR 515.19, Organizational Integration of Asset Management, we say that state DOTs should conduct periodic self-assessment of their asset management capabilities. As written in the final rule, it says based on the results of the self-assessment, the state DOT should look at gap analysis to determine areas of its asset management process improvements. In conducting a gap analysis, state DOT should determine the level of organizational performance effort needed to achieve the objective of asset management. Determine the performance gaps between the existing level of performance effort and the needed level of performance effort. And develop strategies to close the identified organizational performance gaps and define the period of time over which the gap is to be closed. I'm going to say it another way. Are there process improvements in how your agency does business that can be improved in how you do business. I'll say better investment strategies in managing your network. But I'm looking at the organizational processes as I say this. Today, our 3 presentations will provide a more in-depth look at these concepts and requirements. Although this topic is still emerging as an area of focus, Federal Highway has some useful resources available. In particular, I want to point you to the recent FHWA-sponsored peer exchange that addressed some of these topics. You can see the URL address here. In addition, I want you to visit FHWA's Asset Management homepage to learn more. The address is on the screen. Also, take a look at the asset management gap analysis projects we've undertaken, if those have focus on organizations. We've done them in 19 state DOTs. If there's any state that would like FHWA assistance in undertaking a gap analysis, please contact me. And finally, I just want to say that I believe you're going to enjoy today's presentations. So now I'm going to quickly provide an overview of today's webinar, review our agenda, and introduce our speakers. I'm going to pass it to Jana Pak to do that. Jana?
Thanks, Steve. And just on that last link, the one that has the Federal Highways peer exchange, you can go to that URL and download the presentations from the peer exchange. There will be a summary report that will come out later, but if you want to see what was covered during the peer exchange, you can actually access those presentations from that URL. All right, so today's presentations include 3 perspectives on TAM process improvements. Each of our presenters is helping to define this area of practice, and our presentations will highlight some of their recent accomplishments. We'll hear about the challenges and opportunities related to developing a transportation asset management plan and the role of TAM process improvements in that effort. Now, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to TAM process improvements, understanding approaches to identifying and defining specific process improvements in the way you develop a TAMP that meets federal requirements, beginning to apply this knowledge in order to answer how can agencies identify and implement the process improvements that will best help to advance TAM practice, what types of benefits can states realistically expect to achieve from TAM process improvement, what are some of the specific lessons learned for agencies seeking to develop an asset management plan that meets federal requirements. And of course, as in all of our webinars, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. For the agenda today, I'll introduce our speakers before each presentation, but in brief. For our first presentation, we'll hear from Dave Solstrud of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Next, we'll hear from Tammy Haas of the New Mexico Department of Transportation. And our final presentation will be from Jim Porbach of Idaho Transportation Department. We'll have Q&A at the end, and just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature of the webinar menu bar at any time during today's presentation. And in response to our most frequently asked question, yes, we'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. One final note, for our presenters in order to keep things moving along in our schedule. I'll chime in to remind you when you have around 2 minutes remaining in your allotted time. So let's shift to our first presentation today from Dave Solstred. Dave is MnDOT's Asset Management Project Manager. He's been with MnDOT for 34 years, the last 3 focused on asset management. For 18 years prior to that, Dave served as the District Maintenance Engineer in District 8 in Wilmar, Minnesota. As MnDOT's Asset Management Project Manager, Dave manages MnDOT's Asset Management Project Office, charged with delivering numerous asset management initiatives and products and services to the agency. And he also chairs the department's Asset Management Steering Committee. And now let's turn it over to Dave.
All right, thank you, Hannah and Steve. I should check with Perry, maybe make sure my presentation is displaying properly.
Looks great.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm pleased to be able to share some of MnDOT's experiences with you. I was thinking about it, almost seems like kind of a commercial in preparation of a TAMP. I really feel that we gained a lot by just going through the exercise of preparing the TAMP. In terms of process improvement, improvement to our assets as well, those were things that we maintained a consciousness of throughout the preparation of the TAMP and included a lot of recommendations to ourselves, basically within the TAMP in the final chapter of it, as well as I'll speak briefly to a formal gap analysis process that Minnesota participated in that Steve referenced with the consulting help that's available through the FHWA. Okay, so just as a matter of background, MnDOT's had a pretty long history of performance-based planning. We created measures and targets for pavement back in 1998. We actually in 1997 began with a maintenance business products and service measures system, and so that's in 1997. So those types of things have been around for a long time in MnDOT's history. Also, as asset management was emerging as a discipline, MnDOT took on kind of a self-assessment just to look at its future for asset management and developed what they called a framework, and that looked forward to what things we need to prepare. This is what, 5 years ago now, in terms of moving into an asset management organization and to improve our stewardship of assets and management of data and technologies and all that. And so the whole effort was really to build our performance planning efforts. And the third thing I wanted to comment on was MnDOT also joined a collaborative effort to produce a pilot TAMP, which was a cooperative effort with FHWA to look at what the some of the implications of preparing a TAMP would be, I think, to help with the rulemaking and provide maybe some example of TAMP preparation. So again, I think some of the benefits of doing our TAMP plan, they say there's value, as much value in planning as there is in the plan, and I think that may apply pretty well to at least our initial draft TAMP here. So everybody's pretty well familiar with MAP 21 requirements for pavement and bridge on NHS system. At MnDOT, we elected to add a handful of other assets. First, we decided we would like to analyze the entire state-managed highways, both NHS and non-NHS within the TAMP. And I think Steve articulates that once in a while this TAMP should be a tool for departments to use in terms of managing their assets, and we really looked at it that way, and so that was part of the reason that we wanted to include the whole system as we did. Some of the additional assets that we analyzed in the TAMP structure were based in some ways on the data that we might have had available and perceived risks that we might have felt were either unknown or known to be of concern. So Drainage was primarily our highway culvert systems. Pretty good inventory, pretty good condition information. A decision tree had been developed here, so we could really predict work needed and in a kind of a scientific fashion against the inventory condition that was out there. Overhead sign structures, again, that was kind of a concern in terms of risk. We had experienced a lot of loosening of the hold down fasteners on those things. So we had pretty good information inventory, as well as some inspection protocol, and similar for our tower lighting structures, although not as robust in inventory. So finally, the deep stormwater tunnels. MnDOT is a joint owner with the city of Minneapolis. We have many miles of those things. They're 16 feet or so in diameter and about 100 feet below ground in sandstone layers. And again, that was an asset that we had not as good a knowledge as we wish we had, and some concern about the risks. So all these assets we basically ran through the TAMP process of reviewing inventory and performance targets, risk assessment, life cycle costs, performance gaps, all that sort of thing. And then use teams of experts, which is, I think, another point I will make later on in the presentation. So, and then finally, in our TAMP Chapter 9 is really the implementation priorities and future developments that we charged ourselves with. Was really sort of an informal self-assessment. I'll get into a little bit more as we move forward here. A few learnings, I think, from the TAMP process. I would sort of consider them grouped in two categories. Some risk-related. Several outcomes of doing the TAMP exercise resulted in us kind of heading out to the field almost immediately, and in terms of addressing some of the findings that we found through inspections and through risk assessment. And so there were several things that we elected to do basically immediately, and then the whole process improvement related improvements that I mentioned showed up in our Chapter 9. So we found that the subject matter expert teams were really engaged in terms of our preparation of the TAMP, and I think it was in large part due to an opportunity for folks that are passionate about these asset classes to be able to raise the awareness of the infrastructure that they're concerned about, and really saw it as an opportunity to enhance the visibility of those assets. So again, our draft TAMP really kind of kicked off a formal and major asset management goal for MnDOT. So a couple kind of tangible outcomes relative to these various asset classes. With regard to both our pavement and bridge, we have pretty mature asset management systems, good understanding of our capital expenses and benefits, but poor understanding as we stood at the time of the development of this TAMP of our maintenance costs. So that resulted in a major push to develop some systems to capture our maintenance costs in a way that we could associate them with infrastructure condition and model future needs and future financial gaps and work planning efforts. So we used Oracle Business Intelligence, if you happen to be familiar with that. The little graph on the right is an output from a business intelligence assessment. That's just a tool that brings various data systems together. We did not at the time have an asset management system, so that's how we approached that. A few tangible outcomes of our with regard to our culverts. Again, we had pretty good inventory data. We did use the TAMP process to propose some measures and targets for infrastructure condition. I think that also formalizing our inspection protocols. We've got inspection protocols now that look at actually the condition of the culverts and generate the frequency that they need to be inspected. And I think the inspection really reduces our risk in terms of that infrastructure, as well as our ability to respond in a preventive fashion and really save costs and traveler impacts, such as using lining materials in culverts instead of obviously waiting until a failure and retrenching, for example. So the overhead sign structures, again, those teams, as we began to look in more detail at the assets, developed rating systems for inspections. We contracted for some system-wide inspections to really get those quickly up to date. We found some problems and addressed with our internal forces. For example, I mentioned the hold-down fasteners, bought some specialized equipment so we could send our own teams of folks out and retorque a lot of those foundation bolts, just as an example. Also looking at our construction practices and implementing new specifications, working with the construction administration personnel to ensure that we get the best quality product available out there. And then the stormwater tunnels I mentioned about those things. There was a lot of concern and a lot of unknowns with regard to potential failure modes and implications of failures. We actually went in and mapped some of the potential flooding areas and then invested in some additional inspection, created some measures, targets for those systems, and ultimately ended up letting a contract to grout the annular space between the tunnel lining and that sandstone layer, as I mentioned, which all these things together really felt like we reduced our risk considerably in terms of those critical systems. Okay, now Chapter 9, as I refer to it here in our TAMP, was a kind of a formal look within the TAMP of process improvements that we wanted to implement. And here's just kind of an iteration of those things that we took on, and several of them we have in place, such as the first bullet there, a guidance structure. Our asset management steering committee has been up and running for about 2 years now. Measures and targets on payment conditions sometimes don't reflect the totality of the system and some of the implications. So there was a bullet there to look at some of the roads sort of left behind in terms of pavement smoothness measures. What else here? Developed a few research contracts actually for some of the items that came up within the TAMP preparation. And the final one there, utilize an asset management system. That was a kind of a major effort we've undertaken. I'll speak to that in one of the next slides here. So I guess I did speak a little bit to the research. We have also tried to be pretty deliberate about identifying responsibilities for assets, whether it's investment responsibility, inspections, that sort of thing. Was another effort that came out of our TAMP Chapter 9. Performance measure and target policy, we as a result of the TAMP, again, actually created a formal measure and target policy, creation and adoption policy for within the department. Here's another outcome of the TAMP process here. The green arrows speak to when we created our draft TAMP and ongoing work on that. And the blue arrows speak to our capital investment planning, and the second and third bold blue arrows on the lower part of the slide there speak to when we were preparing our capital plans. And even as our TAMP was under development, by that point we had learned enough about some of the roadside assets that we really changed and improved our investment strategies for a lot of the ancillary assets on the highway system. So that was a positive impact of the TAMP planning at that point as well. So, and then in the interim between when we created that first draft TAMP and while we were waiting for the rules to come out, we actually took on additional assets. We felt there was value in that initial planning effort, so we took on a bunch of additional assets. I show those here. We call it TAM2, traffic signals, lighting, ITS devices. You can read for yourself the assets we've in the intervening kind of months. We have done a TAMP level analysis on those additional assets, and our goal is really to be as holistic as we can across the asset spectrum at MnDOT. Mentioning the TAM system, that's basically a contract we wrote with Agile Assets. Many people are familiar with that company. We've completed it for the signals and ITS devices, and we're right now in basically a second phase of TAM's implementation that will go a little bit more enterprise-wide and add in a whole bunch of additional roadside assets that we're interested in managing, kind of outside or outside the major systems we have for pavement and bridge. We're not really changing that at this point in time. So here's a reference. This slide is a reference to the formal gap assessment. Very appreciative of the partnership with Steve in his office and our local division office here. Gordon Proctor and Shabna Varma as consultants spent a considerable amount of time with us at MnDOT. We set up some 11 teams of kind of specialty functions to evaluate, and I think it was a really good process. We started last March and basically finished up this September, and we've generated a list of 6 kind of initiatives that are sort of our next lowest hanging fruit, I guess I'd say, at MnDOT, and so we're kind of aggressively developing plans to implement each of those 6 recommendations that that came out of that planning effort. So again, I feel like that was a really beneficial effort for us. Helped us focus on some things we need to focus on and validate some of the things we already were pretty highly on our radar. So that's most of what I wanted to say. I think we had some pretty good fundamentals in place, and the TAMP has really helped us advance. Just the exercise of writing the TAMP helped us advance a lot. The gap assessment has helped us and will help to formulate our future plans as we go forward here. So that is the end of the remarks I wanted to make.
Thank you, Dave, for sharing your experience. This is really, it's great to hear the advancements that MnDOT is making in asset management. All right. So our next presentation is from Tammy Haas of New Mexico DOT. Tammy is New Mexico DOT's Division Director for Asset Management and Planning. This division includes Pavement Management and Design Bureau, Data Management Bureau, Maintenance Management Bureau, and the Statewide Planning Bureau. She was appointed to head this new division in April of 2013. Prior to her current position, Tammy was New Mexico DOT's District 3 engineer serving the Albuquerque metro area, and has also served as the acting chief engineer and deputy chief engineer for the department. Tammy has been in state government for over 20 years and has also worked for Federal Highways for 12 years. She's a member of the TRB Standing Committee on Strategic Management and serves on the NCHRP 1912 panel, which is the development of the Financial Plan for Transportation Asset Management Guide, and also on NCHRP 08109, that is building the next TAM guide for the community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you, Yana. This is Tammy Haas, and as Yana said, I'm the Division Director for Asset Management and Planning. We did hold that peer exchange a couple of weeks back here in Santa Fe, and so Yana asked me to present about where we're at in New Mexico, and our biggest issue is really how we're going to shift the paradigm to move our program more towards a statewide asset management and focus. So our TAM journey, I think as most DOTs, we kind of look back at ICE-T that was passed in 1991. That's where Federal Highways first implemented the different management systems, and there were 6 different management systems, and the 2 main ones that we look at are our pavement and bridge management systems, and our pavement management program has pretty much evolved and really taken a new direction since 2013. Then when we moved into Safety Loop, that was passed in 2005, I think a lot of focus was changing with more emphasis on safety, and at least in New Mexico, we kind of had very limited action on what we were doing with our management systems during that part of time. And then as MAP 21 came about, and MAP 21 was passed, as everybody knows, back in July of 2012, I think that's when we first started looking and trying to understand what was really included when they started talking about asset management. And it was really building on the management systems that were there. And then, of course, the FAST Act really just continued those programs, but it has been since the FAST Act that we've actually gotten all of the rules from FHWA. So our asset management journey really began back in 2013, and with that, we started a new pavement data collection contract. Prior to that, we'd always collected our pavement data with our own forces or using university students to go out and do the old manual collection. So this was the first time that we actually did a automated data collection for our pavement condition data. And with that effort, we picked up our LiDAR data in order to get some updated asset inventories for a couple of our features. In 2014, that's when we really started development of our asset management plan, and I went out and hired a consultant because this was all pretty new to me, and I wasn't as familiar with what all the requirements were. So during that time, we actually implemented a reconfiguration of our pavement management system. We are using Agile Assets pavement management system, and shortly after that configuration was in place, we looked at our old maintenance management system and decided that it was time to upgrade that system, and we also went with Agile Assets on that in order to make sure that we could integrate all of our pavement improvements that are occurring during maintenance and with our maintenance forces, that we could get that data back into our pavement management system so that we really had a good basis to try to go forward with some predictions and planning. So then in 2015, when we kicked off our contract, one of the big things that we had in that contract was conducting workshops. And so we had a series of workshops and invited a lot of staff, and so those workshops really turned out to be more of an educational piece. And so now we've been trying to develop our TAM and try to get it more visual. That's one thing our cabinet secretary requested, is he wanted it to be more of a visual document than strictly a lot of written text. And so we're in the process of developing our draft TAMP as well as an executive summary report that we were looking at, a very short document under 10 pages in order to use that as part of the marketing. And our goal is really to have our asset management plan through a portal so that it's available to everybody within DOT and really get the message out there. So one of the differences for us is we all have our own culture within our DOTs of how we allocate funds and who's actually in control of all of that fund. So normally you think it's your general office that's really the one that's dictating everything. But in New Mexico, we have 6 districts that are spread out throughout the state, dividing our state really into those 6 little parts. And a lot of the information that we have with our federal program and in our STIP, it's all controlled by our districts. They're the ones that are identifying their projects, and they're really the ones that are establishing how we will be or how we have been identifying pavements and bridges to improve. When we look at the way our budget's divided in New Mexico, our budget between our state and our federal program is about a 50-50 split. Our budget on an annual basis is relatively small compared to some DOTs. We're only at about $850 million. And since the districts develop their STIP as well as develop their priorities for their maintenance funds, they're doing that pretty much independent. And our reconfiguration of our pavement management system just went online in 2016, so it's really trying to educate our district offices on the information that we have available. So when we went to the workshops, we started out with a data planning workshop really to get a handle on the type of data that we already have available and how we would try to use that in the TAMP. And then the first workshop that we had after that was really concentrated just with our bridge folks, and we had our general office bridge staff as well as bridge representatives from each of our 6 districts so that we could really go over what was in our bridge system and what type of data we had. And then following along with that, we also had a similar workshop to talk about all of our pavement data and where we were going with the pavement data collection contract and how we were obtaining the data and how it was going to be utilized in our pavement management system. After we did that workshop, then we went into an objectives and measures workshop, and that's where we created our vision and really the objectives of what New Mexico wanted to do in order to really implement an asset management program. And that's where we came together and we did come up with a couple of our guiding principles, and that was really getting the collaboration with the district because we are trying to move more to a statewide prioritization, but it's very difficult when you're starting to try to take away control of money from the other parts of the district and bring that in more to a centralized process. So we've just been keeping our districts engaged throughout. The risk management piece was a very educational piece for us. We don't have an enterprise risk management program in our DOT, so that's really been our biggest challenge, is identifying those risks and really trying to get that incorporated as we make some of our decisions with our different projects. And so we had that workshop, and we did come in and create a risk register. We're still looking at that, and that's one of those areas that we know that we still need to do further process improvements on, but there are some other areas that are equally as important as that. In our financial planning workshop, we did some exercises to kind of come to group consensus on how to allocate funding between our pavements and our bridges. And then we also looked at, through this process, what type of data improvements are required. So the last piece, we haven't done our communications and reporting workshop yet. We've still been trying to really get the TAMP into a draft format so that we can go out and identify what type of additional marketing we're going to need to do both internally and externally. So this next screen that I have here is our historic funding allocations. And when we did these workshops back in 2015, we really only had our federal 13 and 14 STIP data to look at. And what we were trying to do was really figure out how have we been allocating our money between pavement and bridges. We did strip out a lot of the safety and the other dedicated federal funding sources. Our STIP is predominantly a federally funded list of projects. We don't have that much state money to do those 100% state projects. But when we looked at the breakout between our bridge and our pavement, we were pretty well balanced when we looked at years 13 and 14. And then we did have some projects that were some of the full depth reconstruction or bridge replacement, as well as, we are still adding capacity, even though we know we probably don't really have the revenue to support that, as well as maintain our system. So when we took those funding allocations, those are the ones that we actually used in our financial planning workshop. And at that point, we used a Delphi exercise with everybody amongst the group. And we identified that we've probably been spending in the neighborhood of $240 million for what we would call asset management on just our pavements and our bridges. And we looked at those historical funding allocations, in order to try to get the group to come to consensus about how much we should allocate in the future between pavements and bridges and other construction. Because there are always those needs where you get some of those major investment projects that one particular district might not be able to afford that project within their given funding allocation for the year, and then they're having to either make the project smaller or split the funding amongst adjacent federal fiscal years in order to get it developed. So through that Delphi exercise, everybody had their voice, and we came up with a bunch of different scenarios. Some of us were kind of on the average, and then we did have a few people that they were the outliers where they had really high numbers compared to the group on other construction where everybody else was dedicating it more to pavement and bridge. But we did show them some information on this is what the future condition would be at certain funding levels so that they could try to make some of those decisions on how to allocate their funding. So I think everything we've done up to date has been as much training and training of other DOT staff as actual development of our asset management plan. So the big thing that we're looking at is really our implementation plan. And one of the things that, we're thinking about is really having, how do we get that better data as well as better visuals of the data, and so how can we do better decision making and try to get our decision making based on our good data so we can get to data-driven decision making. So one of the things that SpyPond is our consultant for our asset management plan, and one of the things that they brought to us that we really wanted to show that this was not really a top-down type of document that's being created, but that everybody has been part of it. And because the district engineers are really kind of those guys that have a lot of control within our DOT, based on they're the ones that are making some of those funding recommendations, that we wanted to make sure that as we go into the future, that we do show that there is ownership. So this is one of the ideas we came up with, was these vignettes, which were just really the consultant team sitting down with the different district engineers and other staff within the district, as well as staff here at our headquarters office, to get their perspective on asset management and really get the perspective of what do they do in their district, so that we could include these little interviews or vignettes in the asset management plan into the different chapters and sections that we're looking at, so that we do show that it is staff-driven and certain areas, and it's their words as far as what they put into that. So this particular vignette from our District 1 engineer is one of the key pieces, because they're looking at, and they've been talked to for a couple of years now about how we're trying to move to statewide prioritization. And District 1 has probably been the one district that has embraced the pavement management system the most, to try to use that to make decisions, not only with the federal funds, but as they make some of those decisions with looking at different alternatives on utilizing their state funds for pavement preservation. So they know that it's a focus for us, as well as, for the entire state, to really preserve our system. Then when we talked to our District 4 engineer, he was looking more at risk. District 4 is in the northeast part of the state, and if you look at the demographics, they've been losing population in that area. It's a highly rural area, and District 4 also has probably a higher percentage of their state highways that are not eligible for federal funds. So when you don't have that much state money to use to fix up some of the lower classes of roads, we're looking at those types of things as risks, because some of those roads, they are roads that connect Texas to New Mexico, and especially once we do get snow, up to the ski areas in the northern part of the state. So they are good roads for tourism, but they might be lower class facilities, and it's really how are we continuing to be able to maintain our roads based on the limited funding. And that's kind of one of the themes with in our risk register is looking at that, as well as trying to balance out the urban versus the rural needs within our state. This next page is one of the pages that we're looking at for our executive summary report that would be more of a marketing tool. So we're looking at different ways to actually show the data and having a little bit of narrative on that. So when we go into this executive summary, we'll have the little snippets that do show some of the main components of the requirements of the TAMP, like our inventory and condition, as well as looking at what our future condition would be at different funding levels. So this particular page isn't finalized yet. This is something we're still running the analysis on because our payment management system wasn't configured in anticipation of the federal performance metrics that are included in 490. So that's been our challenge of, we're actually have a group meeting today to talk about different tweaks that we need to make to our payment management system in the future to be able to really bring back our payment condition data so that we can get it into the same format that we have to report to federal highways. If we have all the information, it's just the way we combined it. We combined all of our IRI, cracking, reading, and environmental factors into a payment condition rating, which doesn't really translate into the federal metrics. And so that's one of the things we're trying to reconcile at this point in time, of how to get the data that we have and be able to interpret it so that when FHWA does the payment report card off of HPMS, that we know what those numbers are ahead of time as we go in to make some of the decisions. But it's kind of a challenge going through that much data when you have to look at 10th mile data for the NHS. So our big thing really has been shifting our culture. Change, no, none of us like change, but everybody knows that because of moving to an asset management approach, that we all have to embrace that change. It's just always challenging as a district engineer when you have the public and politicians always saying, how come you're not fixing my road? My road's the worst road in the state. And it's really, maybe it's not as bad compared to some other roads, but it's really trying to balance out those out-of-state or out of the DOT requests and balancing that with our data that actually shows our conditions. And so part of that has been our educational process internally to really understand what the value of asset management would be and how we're using our data and really getting into that concept of going to a statewide prioritization. And so I think we're getting there. We're not done yet. We're still talking and gaining more of a consensus on those things. So this slide that I added here is really some of the guiding principles that I mentioned earlier that we came up with our objectives and measures workshop. So one of them was really talking about how do we achieve our performance targets. And at the time, we didn't know what those were because the 23 CFR 490 hadn't been published yet, but we knew they were coming about, and we knew we had some of our own internal targets as well as targets established by our state legislators. So we've been trying to make sure that we're all consistent there. So we've been kicking around whether we should reserve a % of the budget for statewide prioritization and then the districts get to make their own decisions with the rest, or what percentage of the recommendations from our pavement or bridge model do they have to adhere to, and then they can use engineering judgment for the rest. And then really the other focus always is how do you determine how you're going to fund things based on which particular system it's on. So one of the tools we were looking at was a multi-objective decision analysis approach. I know some DOTs use decision lens. That's one of the ways that you can kind of look at cross-asset allocation. We're trying to go into this multi-objective decision approach because it looks at our agency goals from our strategic plan. And we, as everybody at the workshops, we're establishing what particular criteria under each of those goals and then developing those performance measures and doing the weighting to calculate which projects will be prioritized. And as we do this as a group, it's giving everybody the opportunity to identify what particular criteria they think we should be using, and we're trying to get as much data driven criteria and minimize where we can some of the subjective criteria. But we're looking at this approach in order to get that buy-in, really to kind of link our decision making with our agency strategic plans and goals. So this other slide is kind of a similar one to the MOTA, but when you look at, whether you have policy level goals and objectives, and then you have your budgets, and you're looking at how do we do those trade-off decisions or those MOTA decisions so that you can allocate the resource so that you can have those programs in order to deliver projects. And then as you look at that, then it's like doing that check. Are we meeting our performance targets? And is that really what our expectations were? And getting really into that continuous process improvement cycle. And another thing we're talking about as well is really, as we have that direction with our strategic plan, and then we have all of our long-range plans with planning, how do they link up with our STIP and our asset management plan? These things are all linked together, and when you look at what is our agency vision in the center, all of these pieces have to link together, and really in order to get that annual performance report based on what are the projects that we identified and what are the projects that are in our long-range plan, and is that still in line with our asset management plan and where that is going in the 10-year basis, and then trickling down to result into the STIF and the projects that we're implementing. And then after we get them implemented, we do that cross-check on, what are the performance conditions now compared to what they were in the past, and did those projects actually get us to the objective that we had. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to Yana.
Thanks, Tammy. It's fascinating to see the great progress you're making in New Mexico. Our next presentation is from Jim Purbach of Idaho Transportation Department. Jim is a registered professional civil engineer and project management professional. He's been engaged in transportation projects and engineering for 25 years. Jim has worked in New Mexico, Arizona, and Idaho. Since 2013, he has worked for the Idaho Transportation Department as a district project manager, and was recently promoted to the state asset management engineer. In this role, Jim oversees all ITD roadways in the state, which is approximately 12,000 lane miles. Jim served in the military for nearly 17 years, both as an active duty Marine and as a Navy Reserve officer in the Civil Engineering Corps. When not brushing up on current events in asset management, he enjoys outdoor activities such as fishing and biking. As an avid cyclist, Jim commuted over 1,000 miles last year, and he lives in East Boise with his wife of 24 years, Tracy, and their 3 children, Joshua, Abigail, and Nathaniel. Now I'll turn it over to Jim.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you today about Idaho Transportation Department Asset Management Lessons Learned. I think you'll see a lot of similarities between Idaho, not only how we are as a state, but the challenges that we face. We looked at our gap analysis, and Gordon Proctor and Shobna Varna helped us through federal highways with that. We're doing okay on our roads. When we look at the new TPM criteria, we're well above the federal targets. So our gap isn't necessarily our performance in how we do asset management. Our gap, like as Tammy spoke to, is changing a paradigm, and that's what I'm excited to share with you today. ITD has a long history and commitment to pavement preservation, and there's numerous examples of how ITD has harnessed technology and leveraged technology to drive innovation and organizational improvement. This presentation is about building upon those hard-won successes, not about changing directions or starting from scratch. improvement to our processes is a logical progression, and it's attributable directly to our desire and commitment to be the best transportation department in the nation. And as we work towards a one highways vision, that's to say, prioritizing, planning, and working on projects across the state instead of the silos of district boundaries, it was imperative that ITD review current technology, data streams, and management practices, and understanding not only why those things are important, but also to begin charting the course for what and how we need to change in order to become an asset-centric organization. I've begun to use the motto from many to one for all to concisely signify what we're after, changing from many data sources, opinions, and actions to a shared goal, and that goal is effective asset management for the benefit of all, not just ITD employees, but for our customers, the citizens and visitors of Idaho. I'm going to begin the conversation today by sharing with you some information about the state of Idaho. Believe it or not, we're not all about potatoes. Then we'll talk about the importance of aligning the alignment of asset management practice to the vision, mission, and culture of the organization. I believe that this is the capstone of the presentation in reviewing how ITD developed an asset management framework which shows how organizational success factors, people, process, and technology, as well as project development, are interconnected and really driving home that they're not mutually exclusive. And I think this is, as we move forward with TAMP, critical to meeting with success. Although we're world famous for potatoes, and we led the nation last year with 8 million tons of potatoes, there's a lot more that meets the eye. We've got the largest single hops farm in North America, which is about 1,800 acres, and we grow most of the hops for Anheuser-Busch. Idaho is known as the gem state. We mine 72 types of precious and semi-precious stones that are produced here and shipped worldwide out of the state. We have 3,100 miles of rivers. That's the most in the United States. And if you're a fisherman like I am, that translates into some awesome fishing opportunities. Boise State University has the only blue football field. It's nicknamed the Smurf Turf. And we also have the deepest gorge in the country, and that is Hell's Canyon. It's almost 8,000 feet deep, which is deeper than the Grand Canyon. And so as a sidebar, I invite you to come explore the great state of Idaho. And if you ever have a chance, I would love to act as your tour guide or advisor to this truly wonderful state. As far as demographics are considered, we're considered a little big state, kind of like New Mexico. We're the 14th largest state in land area, but we have the 7th lowest population density. Boise and adjacent cities, which is referred to as the Treasure Valley, is the largest metropolitan area in the state with a population of nearly 700,000. This area is one of the fastest growing regions in the nation. ITD currently has about 5,000 centerline miles of roadway, which is comprised of about 600 miles of interstate and about 2,500 miles of non-interstate NHS. We also have about 100 miles of roadway that is unpaved that's part of the state system. Like most state departments of transportation, the Idaho Department of Transportation, ITD, is no stranger to seeking better ways to manage our pavements. And our quest began nearly 40 years ago as we developed a mainframe system to track and report on pavement performance. In the mid-'80s, we refined the system to enable us to perform some simple economic and alternatives analysis. This system was utilized for nearly 20 years until it was replaced with the HERS-ST program. ITD discovered that that program, while it was a good program, was not adequate for our needs. So in 2009, we purchased a transportation asset management system, TAMS, from Agile Assets. We're currently in the process of soliciting bids for a new TAM system that is better able to integrate with our LRS and a GIS framework. So what is the result of this 40-year legacy in pavement management? We've been very successful in maintaining 85% of our network in an acceptable state of good repair. This is both good and bad. It's good because those that have gone before me established practices and procedures and a history that have driven us to success in managing our pavements. The challenge then is to convince folks that we can improve our process and meet with even more success. And that in attempting to do so, it does not discount the successes of the past. That's to say, asset management, that this asset management journey we've embarked upon does not mean that we're changing directions. Rather, it means we're honoring those who've gone before, respecting where we are as an organization today, and planning a sustainable legacy for those who will follow. So why change? Why improve our processes? I hear it all the time. We're doing just fine, Jimbo. What's the reason? Well, I had mentioned that we're experiencing rapid growth in the Treasure Valley. The secret's out. Boise is a great place to live and raise a family. We need to change so we can keep pace with this growth. We need to create a more stability in our project prioritization and funding programs by increasing our time horizon from 5 years to a 10-year planning horizon. In the face of funding uncertainties that we all contend with, we need to understand the implications of projects on the basis of a statewide priority, not based on individual districts. We need to better understand and evaluate the treatments that we choose across the life cycle of the pavement, not just across the individual project. That is to say, don't just paint the road black. Do the right treatment at the right time for the long run. Beginning a journey without a destination is really exciting for a while, but if you don't know where you're going, you'll never know when you get there, right? ITD's asset management destination is full alignment with our organizational mission and values. The word picture that you're seeing right now was crafted from the words appearing in what we call ITD's X matrix. The X matrix is a scorecard that was developed by our executive management that documents goals across the organization, and it also assigns roles and responsibilities for those executives. So everything listed on the X matrix has a champion and someone responsible for it. One of our process changes that we discovered as we began the journey on TAMP was also to assure that everyone in the organization was aware of the X matrix. And this was done by having employee performance evaluations and individual performance goals defined how that individual action contributes to the greater goal contained in the X matrix. There's an awful lot we're striving for in the X matrix, and one of the main considerations with any thing that we embark on as an organization or individuals within this organization is that it aligns with and supports achieving the objectives of the X matrix. For asset management's part, as we strive to become an asset-centric culture and improve ITD's ability to transform quality data into easily accessible information across the organization, that information will readily enable and inform, and to some extent drive the X matrix objectives. And in short, by ensuring that everyone in the organization is aligned with the X matrix, it means that within ITD, we all walk the walk and we all talk the talk. As part of walking the walk and talking the talk, my team, me and my team, sat down and we developed this mission statement. And this was a process improvement. I know it doesn't seem like much, and some people don't put a lot of stock in mission statements. I do. It was a process improvement because although we always instinctively knew what we were trying to achieve, now that it was documented, we owned it and we had to live it. And in short, we determine the journey's end. Another process change is stating what the asset management team values. This is a commitment to the organization that, and this is a process improvement, is that to drive that this isn't a me effort, that this is a we effort. This isn't Jim Porbaugh trying to write a document because the feds mandated us to do it. This is a better way to do business. And it's a we effort. By communicating and committing to these values to others in the organization, they now know what they can expect from us. I can't emphasize it enough that one of the biggest things that we have to promote adoption of the TAMP is that we have to focus on communicating that it's we, not me. Another big process change was developing a way to easily relate asset management processes throughout the organization and establish linkages to the project development lifecycle, as well as to organizational success criteria. We began by acknowledging that to be the best, quality must be central to everything. We have, for the last several years, been working actively to instill a constructive culture within ITD and focus on allowing everyone in the organization the equal opportunity to voice and implement innovative ideas. And this has resulted in national recognition for our Innovate ITD program. The foundation to quality is mission and clearly defined focus areas. ITD's director, Brian Ness, specified 6 keys to success as we strive on our mission to become the best transportation department in the nation. And as you can see, these are focused on corridor planning, succession planning, effective asset management, partnering with others, being data-driven, and ensuring that all that we do is transparent. You can see that asset management is tied to all of these areas, either as inputs or outputs. Understanding this raised the awareness of just how important asset management and the TAMP is to the overall success of the organization. The next step was to tie this to those things that drive the organization, namely people, processes, and technology. And these are cornerstones to what we do. And this should look very similar to the project management iron triangle, and we've just adopted it to the asset management business function iron triangle. And the first thing we have to talk about is people, and this is the touchy-feely part of the presentation. And I know most engineers are world-renowned for our personalities and soft skills, so if you'll bear with me just for a second. Most engineers approach things with a high level of rigor. We like to solve math problems, we like to make big plan sets, we like to solve problems, and we like to do it with the full focus and intentionality of our efforts. And a lot of times we'll get to a solution and then might give it to somebody, and I may take the time before I get to the next problem to communicate why it's relevant to them, what I just gave them, why it's relevant. And then I may, if I have enough time at the end of the day, establish a relationship. And a big process change for us was to turn that on its head. And I begun to say, no, it's not about rigor. It's about the relationship. And if I want to win these districts over and I want to change things, I have to feel the pinch of their shoe. So it's about reaching out and saying, hey, this is me, who are you? And listening and spending a lot of time building the relationships, because that relationship is foundational to trust. And if I have trust, now we can express what they do and why it's relevant to me, and why what I do is relevant to them. And then I can talk about rigor, and that's how much I need to do. So it enabled us to confuse effort with results. I don't have to, like Tammy talked about on the annual paving report, I don't have to produce a 300-page document. They might need a 3-page memo, and that's all they have time for, and that's relevant to them, and that shows that what I told them I was going to do, they can trust me, and it strengthens our relationship. And if you do this enough, you begin to get the synergy, you begin to build the team, so they understand you're not taking their money away by not scoping projects for them. You're building a team. And again, it's a we, not me. The next thing that we have to talk about is our processes. And to challenge the processes, I'm going to try to show you a little demo here. If I asked you how many times does 5 go into 25, you're all probably going to say, why are you bothering me? The answer is 5. Well, what if I told you the answer is 14 and I can prove it to you? We do this all the time. We have outputs from processes that are accepted and we routinely perform them, but intuitively we don't agree with the answer, but we don't know why. And if you do this with asset management, all these districts and everybody else looks at you as you plan the projects. And if they don't understand why those projects were selected and the process that drove that, they're going to argue with you. So let me show you how this works. There's 25 divided by 5 is equal to 14. So I take 5 into 25. 5 won't go into 2, but it'll go into 5 one time. So I take 1 times 5 and I subtract that. I get 20. 5 goes into 20 4 times. And there's no remainder. I just showed you if 5 goes into 25 14 times. Well, just to prove to you that I got my money's worth when I went through the University of Arizona, I'm going to do it by multiplying it. 14 times 5 is 25. So there you have 14 times 5. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5. There's 25. Okay, I got a master's degree, so now I know I'll just prove it again by adding it all up. So I'm going to add these 4s up, so I know you're on mute, but just count along with me. I got 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. I'm going to count down 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. See, I told you. 14, 5 times is 25. I know this is kind of silly, but if you don't understand the process and the data that you're working with, the people are going to get different answers. And at best, this situation leads to frustration. And at worst, it leads to serious conflict that grinds the organization to a halt. The point is that we have to have processes that are well understood and communicated so that we all can agree to the outcome that the process produces. The next thing that we have to talk about is technology. And technology is amazing, and it's awesome, and it's wonderful if you share it. I'm fortunate in that I own my own video collection van, and we collect all of our own roadway data. I collect about 15 billion data points a year, and somewhere in the order of 40 million photographs of our roadway system and pavements every single year. And it's tons, it's terabytes of data. And the process improvement that we started to understand was, hey, we're not in the data business anymore. As an asset manager, I'm in the business of information. And information is data that's that's been analyzed and it's converted into information. So as part of understanding the relationship, the relevance, and the rigor with folks was they don't want to get in and mine the data. They spend so much energy trying to do that then they can't make effective decisions. So they confuse effort with results, right? So we're trying to engage technology to take all of this rich data and either present it graphically in GIS or charts or something that's easily available throughout the organization. And that's very similar to what Tammy spoke to. The next thing we have to do is connect the dots. So we know what our cornerstones are, is that it's people, process, and technology. People are connected to process by documentation, and people are connected to technology by training. And processes and technologies have to be compatible. And if I'm not working those sides to keep things in balance, keep that triangle equilateral, then I have something that's broken and I'm not being effective to my mission. So one of the process improvements that we've done is, as we talk about new facets of our TAMP development, is ensuring that we're looking at training, documentation, and compatibility, and maintaining, growing this triangle equilaterally. We also have to connect those aspects to quality. So by hiring talented people, that's the relationship between people and quality. Quality processes are those that are effective. So we do have processes and we review them to make sure they're meeting the user's needs. And then technology and quality, that relationship is governance. So we do have a governance council as we bring new software and applications into the organization. So this is all well and good, but how do I connect those 4 cornerstones in quality to the director's 6 key factors? Well, it's by understanding what we do, and that's the product development lifecycle. And so all of your roads go through this product development lifecycle, and that's evaluating, planning, development, construction, and then operations. And asset management, again, it has inputs and outputs through all of those processes. And so if I'm effectively working through all of those processes, then I'm in alignment with the director's 6 key elements of success. And so this is a graphic that we've arrived at, that we've been sharing throughout the organization, as an attempt for folks to understand that, look, this isn't just a document. It really truly is about quality, it's about people, it's about processes, it's about technology, and it's about the long-term view of meeting the director's 6 success criteria. So in closing, the key takeaways that I would tell you for your process improvements that we've learned from, and these aren't the hard skills, these are soft skills, is be a servant leader. If you're the asset management engineer or you're leading the TAMP development, be servant. Understand that you offer an awful lot to folks. To help them, you don't want to hinder them. So approach it by saying, how can I help you? What do you need? Here's how I can get it to you. Is it meaningful? Live we, not me. This is a we effort. It's a team sport. It's not just you. We place people above the processes. A lot of times it's easy to bark about outcomes and that you don't like it, and to blame, old Sally's over there running the computer the same way she's run the computer for 20 years. Don't beat up on Sally. Look at the process. Redefine the process. We can control people through processes, but we can't control processes through people, because they'll just rebel. Emphasize that this isn't changing directions. Nobody, I know a lot of the folks on the call were government workers, state employees. Nobody shows up and says, gee, I want to do a bad job today. We're committed to providing benefits to those people that live in our states. So, and that's been consistent forever. So emphasize we're not changing directions. Data is the new currency. I love saying this. The person who ends up with the best information derived from the best data is the same one that's going to be able to sell their project. That translates into getting money. So data is the new currency. And my biggest thing that I think I've learned from our journey so far in asset management is that the TAMP, albeit it's a federally mandated document, that by looking into performing this gap analysis, looking at our history, what that allows us to do is now write down and honor those that have gone before us and where we are today, and respect that, hey, things might be messed up, but we've done good work in the past, and we're going to continue to do that in the future. And if I can understand the past, relate it to today, then I can effectively plan for a sustainable future for those that are going to follow in my footsteps maintaining this roadway network. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and I'll turn control back over. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to hear your experience, and I'm glad you had a chance to share that with a group. All right, that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you to all of our presenters. It's time for the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a question, please type it in to the Q&A feature on the webinar toolbar, and I'll take them in the order that you type them in. So I'd like to start with a first question, which is, as you're going through your TAMP development process, and through that effort, you're working on your TAM programs, to all of our panelists, how do you decide, what's the process you're using to decide what is in the TAMP that you're developing for the federal requirements, and what are the improvements that you're dealing with outside? And is it something you distinguish or not? Why don't we start with Dave?
Well, I think we, our TAMP has really been around for for quite a while, and so most of our initiatives, probably a matter of timing for us. The TAMP was kind of the vehicle we had at the time that we started looking at process improvements, and since then we've gone on to probably the most significant thing is creation of our Asset Management Steering Committee, and so that body is really charged with looking at the areas that we do need to improve and prioritizing those, and probably also looking after allocating funding to to the improvements that we like to pursue. So I think that's it's kind of the guidance from that body.
Okay, Tammy, how about you?
So what we decided to put in our TAMP, well, we kind of only have data for pavement and bridges, so that's why we're only doing that. We haven't really identified a process for collecting other asset data at this point. So I think our biggest challenge of what's actually in our TAMP is whether or not to include all pavements on all state-maintained roads, or limit our TAMP to the NHS. Right now, we're kind of addressing all of our pavements on all of the systems, and the same thing is the bridge data is easier. That's probably our most historical data, so we're going with everything on that. But to figure out what are we doing on the outside, we're still trying to figure out how to do different components of when we identify an asset to collect data on, what actually are we going to collect to actually build that inventory. So we haven't really gotten there yet, but that's kind of still one of the things we end up kind of sending off at times, is because everybody says, your asset management, collect my asset for me. And if they don't like the questions when I say, why do you need it? What are you going to use it for? What do you want me to collect? So that's one of our next steps, is really to kind of create a base data dictionary and work on data governance to identify additional asset information to collect.
How about you, Jim?
So in Idaho, when we concluded our TAMP gap analysis, we looked at how we were performing just on the interstate and non-interstate NHS, and kind of decided that we're doing okay. We really didn't have a lot of performance gaps per se. What that gap analysis led to was we have gaps in how well we communicate and how we do that how do we allocate funds, and then how do we do life cycle planning, and getting like on a treatment regime. So that's where we've gone with our TAMP, is we're just going to focus on we're not going to include all the state roads. It'll just be the NHS in our TAMP, and really started to focus on better life cycle planning and how that can be integrated into the organization. We've developed some prioritization of items that we would like to include other than roads and bridges, similar to TAMI. That's all we report right now. And that's a pretty big thing for us to get our head around and get better processes. We do have a prioritization plan. Right away, we'd like to start looking at sign structures and then maybe culverts and then guardrails. But that probably will be the second version of our TAMP. And right now, we just would like to make sure that we're focusing on the NHS and meeting the requirements of the TAMP, and that will speak to the majority of our system.
Thanks, everyone. We're actually getting to the end, and so since there are not any additional questions, let's move on to our final slide. The next webinar will be held February 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll have the presenters confirmed shortly, and you'll hear from us soon about the next set of webinars and if there's a theme for them. And so I hope you'll be able to join us at those. Additional webinars will be continuing for quite a while, scheduled every 2 months or so for another 2 years. So please send us ideas for the webinars that you'd like to see. That will help us with shaping future series of webinars and topic areas. So just as a reminder, for additional information and the recording and the slides from this webinar, go to tam-portal.com. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to the panelists. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.